Hello and welcome to Money Matters TV. Today we have a very special program. We are going to be discussing a topic very important to both investors and savers alike, and that is the subject of longevity. In great numbers, many of us are living much longer, and because of that, we have not just the financial issues, but we have the non-financial issues that need to be addressed with this topic. So I'm Patricia Dunn from Merrill Lynch in West Conshohocken, Pennsylvania, and today with me is a very special guest, Judith Kurnick, who is the founder of Judith Kurnick Coaching, LLC, that specializes in working with individuals age 50 and above with the non-financial issues related to retirement and longevity. Welcome, Judith.
Thanks, Pat.
Being a financial person, I want to start with the statistics, and the statistics are rather astounding. Mortality tables today tell us that a healthy couple age 65 have a high probability that one spouse will live to see a 30-year retirement. Wow, that's not our parents' retirement. Let's translate that. That means that one spouse will live to be age 92. And it doesn't stop there. There is a 25% chance that a spouse will live to age 97. And a 10% chance that one will live to be 100 years old. Clearly, there are a lot of issues that go with this, and in my practice, we address this because living longer means greater need for income, higher health care costs, and a higher probability of cognitive decline. Now, we do address these as part of a wealth management practice, but I know very well that it doesn't stop there, and that we need to have the non-financial issues addressed, which is where my friend Judith comes in. So I'm going to start by asking Judith, just what do you mean by the longevity revolution, and how does it affect people approaching their retirement years?
Well, what it means essentially is that people in our 60s, like us, many of us expect to live 30 more years. And the question is, what does that mean for us as individuals and the health of our society as well? So what it means is that there is an old medical model that tells you that our health peaked at around age 40. And after that, it was kind of downhill. But the new medical model really shows more peaks and valleys, and the fact that our health tends to even out, and there are fewer highs and lows for the first 10 to 15 years after the so-called retirement age. So what you end up with is basically a new old age model that includes so-called young old, which is basically 65 to 75 or 80, and the old, which is more like 80 plus. And that means that the young old has become almost a kind of extended middle age.
Well, I know there's some new research telling us how we can stay healthy longer. What are you finding in the research?
Well, it's fascinating, Pat. In 2019, there was a paper published in the National Academy of Sciences that showed that, believe it or not, optimism is correlated with an 11 to 15% longer lifespan, and certainly it correlated with living past the age of 85.
Now, my clients always ask me this question, and I'm not really prepared to answer it. Is it an issue of nurture? Is it an issue of nature? How are the genes involved? Some outlive their parents, some don't. What's the correlation?
Well, there's also fascinating new research there. So people used to believe, the medical folks believed, it was about a 20% genetic influence and the rest was lifestyle. There is new research from Ancestry.com because obviously more people have put their data online. And they're finding that genetics really only influences something like 7% of people's lifespan. So lifestyle choices could lead up to 93%, make that much of a difference. It's amazing how much the choices we make will affect our lifespan.
Now, you shared with me recently that we have some startling new data about the dreaded D word, dementia. That's a concern to everyone. Would you share that?
Yes, this was a public health study from Yale that it was focused on people with a high genetic risk factor for dementia. And it amazingly showed that people in that risk group that had a more positive view of aging were 50% less likely to develop dementia than those, again, in the same risk group who had a more negative view of aging. Astounding.
Now, some people are just plain positive by nature, but is there a way to develop a positive, optimistic attitude if someone wants to live longer?
Yes, in fact, there is a whole movement in psychology that focuses on this. And it started in the late 90s. Martin Seligman, who was actually here at Penn, and it still is, was head of the American Psychological Association. And he began to look at what makes people successful, what enables people to live happy, healthy lives mentally. And the research began to get funded, and it became the movement now known as positive psychology. And what he found is that there are 5 factors that support what we call well-being. And those 5, he's got an acronym like everybody else called PERMA. So the first one is positive emotions, feelings like pleasure and comfort. And then engagement is number 2. And that is really the sense of flow when you lose yourself in whatever you're doing. Relationships, obviously, pretty self-explanatory, supportive relationships. Meaning in your life. The M is for meaning and the sense of having some purpose. And the last is accomplishment for obvious reasons.
Well, now, what are some of the traps that you see in your practice that people in their 50s and 60s can fall into?
Well, there are really 3 key ones. And the first is not working with a financial advisory practice to figure out where you are. People get so scared, and sometimes they don't even realize the way it works. And it's so important, particularly, not to use the automated advice because the complexities of Social Security, particularly, are so much greater than anything you see online. And I've experienced this personally myself. You can leave money on the table if you don't talk to someone who really knows what they're talking about. And the third one is generic advice just isn't the same when it comes to things like healthcare and long-term care and powers of attorney, all of these things that you need to know about. So that's really important. The second one is planning to just work indefinitely and putting all your eggs in that basket, trying to get all those positive emotions and those positive factors from work. It's not realistic. The third is ignoring the emotional and physical changes that happen at this stage in life. And we all know there's some physical changes, but there's also the feeling of being kind of uncomfortable about getting older, which can have very deleterious effects.
Well, now I clearly understand the effects that finances can have on the whole picture.
Yeah.
But what other aspects play into the longevity picture?
Well, just focusing on the financial planning can lead to either false reassurance or paralysis. And obviously the false reassurance is if you think you have all the numbers in place and you think you have plenty to go with financially, that everything else is going to just get taken care of. And what they don't realize is the professional people have very strong identities. And they don't realize what happens when those identities go away. And sometimes there's a short-term high and a honeymoon, they call it, and then it can really spiral downward. People don't know what to do with themselves, and there can be some very bad effects from that. The other side of it is the paralysis, the sense that they can't make a difference, that they can't get out of where they are, needing to keep working at the same job for good, and that they're just stuck. So it could go either way.
All right. Well, if someone is planning to retire in the next year or two, what planning besides the financial planning they would do with me should they be focused on?
Well, the first thing to do is look at your values and what is important to you now, which may not be the same as what was important to you even 10 years ago. That can take a lot of forms. There are some great self-help books out there. The next thing is to really look at the psychic payoffs you get from work and how do you replace them. And I would say the third is to look at your attitudes about yourself getting older and be honest about that and think about whether they're really, really the most positive and productive attitudes you could have.
Well,
I actually help my clients clarify these, and it's really interesting when you talk to people that haven't thought about it, how much of a difference it can make. And I've seen people discover things that they never thought about, and it enables them to have a totally different life.
well, as in my own field, it is a process. It doesn't happen overnight. And I usually start working with clients 10 to 15 years out before retirement. I would imagine that you'd want to start working with them at a minimum of 6 months out.
6 months to a year is ideal. It gives people a chance to really think about what they might do next, so that when they get to that retirement party or whatever that moment is, they know where they're going. And even if they don't follow that plan, they're in an emotional state that is so much more positive and productive, so they can try new things and really think about it in a different way.
Well, then let's talk about your role here as a coach. How should a person choose a coach?
It's a great question. Coaches come from a lot of different backgrounds. Many of them have psychology or education backgrounds. Others, like me, come from other professions where they used coaching more informally in their work. And the most important thing is to get someone that has been trained through a program that is accredited by the International Coach Federation. That has become the sort of standard for coach training. The next thing is to make sure you get a personal consultation, and that can often be on the phone. But the idea is to really figure out how that coach works and what the chemistry with that person is going to be like. And most of all, if you're going to be comfortable trusting them, because you have to be honest and you can dig pretty deep, and you want to make sure that you're really okay sharing some of the worries and the concerns and whatever else is important for you. So those are the key things, is getting the right background and getting the right first opportunity to, and I would suggest trying a few people out. Don't pick the first person you talk to.
Now, should they expect the coach to actually tell them what to do?
No, and that's one of the biggest difference between coaching and consulting, for example. The coach is your cheerleader and your partner. And the idea is that the coach uses their skills to support you in exploring and basically accomplishing whatever goals you want to accomplish. And their job is to help you figure out how to do it through very important listening, questioning, observing skills, and really being there for you every step of the way.
Now, being there for you every step of the way, does this have to be person to person, in person, or could it be done long distance, over the phone? You know, we all live busy lives.
It's a great question, Pat. You know, many coaches have worked effectively for many years on just the telephone. It's actually the same idea, if you think about it, that psychiatrists used with the couch, where they're not looking at each other, because you learn to listen more carefully when you don't look at the person's face. You hear things, you hear silence, you ask different questions, and at the same time, we of course can use FaceTime and Zoom, and the electronic side is great, and I have plenty of clients who are local and like to see face-to-face and come into the office. So it all works.
Now, could we go back a step? Because clearly the types of clients you're working with are the same things that I've seen in the office. Maybe you could give us some examples and more in depth. Let's start with client that I typically see, and that's the one who is financially comfortable. What's next for them?
Well, I'll give an example of a CEO I saw who came to me when he was negotiating his last contract, and he'd never really thought about what was coming next, and because work really took up all his time. In the process of working together, we discovered the things that really excite him outside work, and he realized he would enjoy having some cultural activity near him, that he would like to do some consulting, that he wanted to be in the country to enjoy the outdoors. There were a bunch of things that he put together, and in the process of working with me, we figured out that he could buy a house in another part of the country that he hadn't thought about. He was visiting it at the time, and it came up because this was all on his mind. And he bought this house and rented it out to start with, because he was still obviously working, but decided that he would shorten his last year, phase out, if you will, and do more of a phased retirement so that he could spend more time in this new chapter home and start finding some consulting there. These were all things that had not been options or even in his mind before.
So it wasn't just a matter of having sufficient income and resources financially. He still needed to find purpose and meaning and excitement in his life. Now, the other extreme that I often see is no matter how many times I try to reassure someone that financially they can do this, they can retire, they're utterly convinced that they have to keep their nose to the grindstone and that they're going to leave the office being taken out on a gurney. How do you help someone that clearly I can't help them, I can show them the numbers, but it's not enough?
You're practically quoting what I've heard from attorneys, which is, they're going to have to carry me out of here. Mm-hmm. I have heard that more than once. And those people often have no idea what they really have or what they're going to need. So you've got to get them to be willing to just stop and consider the possibility that there might be things that they want out of life that they're not going to get from work and their families. And frankly, planning to work till you drop is not a retirement plan. And the fact is that life gets in the way and you can't predict. So it's always great to have a plan B.
All right, well, you can see that we really need both the financial side and the non-financial side. Taking a moment and going back to comments that you made about the automated advice, the generic advice, and the personalized advice, I'd like to leave our viewers with a deeper sense of that because it's so important. You mentioned that the automated advice, dealing with the computer, answering questions, the computer tells you what to do, often it just simply can't address things like Social Security, which are so complex, and people end up leaving money on the table. The next step up is generic advice, which is very much like a legal Zoom, where you call a person, each time you call you get a different person, they can give you generic advice, they have a generic toolbox. They cannot address things like long-term care insurance, powers of attorney, living wills, all the ancillary things that go around the portfolio. The portfolio is one thing, but having all the other pieces in place.
Absolutely.
Is there enough life insurance to take care of the family if this turns out to be a shortened retirement? It's really not till you get to the personalized advice level where it's one-on-one with the financial professional that we can dive into all of these issues. We can discuss things like how much is too much to inherit, and do we want to leave a legacy at the end of our lives, and how do we feel about philanthropy, and but how do we take care of mom and dad first?
Absolutely.
How do we protect our assets in the event of cognitive decline? But as I've said, it doesn't stop with what we do. It's a partnership.
It absolutely is, and that's why I always tell my clients they need to work with a financial advisor, and I will work with their advisor if need be. So we do partner, and it's very important. There are so many different elements now because of this longevity revolution, because we have so many more years and so many more years that are productive and healthy, that we need to look at it differently than previous generations did. And that's why it's so important to consider all these questions, and I really appreciate the chance to talk with you about it, Pat.
And I agree. I would add to that partnership because I think within this circle of trusted advisors, you also need an attorney.
Yes.
Because the financial advisor does not write legal documents. They can recommend legal documents, but they don't write the legal documents. And of course, an accountant, particularly if we're getting into the areas of philanthropy and charitable remainder trusts and charitable lead trusts and what we want to leave behind because we were blessed to walk this earth.
Absolutely.
So it takes a village. Would you agree?
Totally.
I have had experience with clients that I call lousy at retiring. And they've retired multiple times. In fact, they'll call me up and tell me they're retiring, and I'll say, again? I take it this process is very challenging. Have you run into the same thing?
I have certainly seen it. People sometimes are burned out, and they think they're ready to retire, but after a vacation, they realize they're not. And sometimes what it is really doing the work to understand what kind of next work do they want to do. I talk about the psychic payoffs because people get certain things from work and they don't usually identify them specifically. And so, a lot of times when somebody retires, they'll be told, oh, go join a board or go do volunteer work. That's fine if those are the things you love. But if that's not what really turns you on when you're working with people, then it's going to be a mismatch, and you're going to be very unhappy. So the key is to do the work beforehand, and a lot fewer people that do that work fail at retirement. But the ones that think that retirement is just stopping cold, going on the golf course, hanging out with the grandchildren, and it's all going to be taken care of, they're going to fail a lot of the time if they are people that still have the energy and the productivity that most of us still have at this stage in life.
I couldn't agree more. Energy, productivity, I see it all the time in my practice. Maybe you could share with us like a most unusual story of how somebody put that energy and productivity to work in retirement.
Well, I don't know. I think there are two examples that I would give. One is not so much productivity, but more creativity, which is a couple that really wanted to travel and frankly didn't have the resources that many of us think of needing. So they decided that it was important enough to them that they would sell their house and buy an RV. And they go to different national parks in an RV. And they're very happy that way. And they have a small country cottage that they go to periodically, but their whole house is gone. And they're very happy that way. So that's a creative solution. Another solution I have heard about, this was not one of my clients, but I just think it's a wonderful idea, is a woman who always wanted to act. and she had been retired, and it took her a while to find the right thing, but she decided to become a medical actor. And in medical school, they need people to pretend to be patients. And this is incredibly fulfilling to her, and of course it's serving a great cause. So with the right research and preparation, you can really find interesting things. The key is to give yourself the time, and that could mean shadowing somebody during a vacation, doing some travel to explore some opportunities. So you're testing things out before you take the leap and before you say goodbye to your office environment.
We could go on here for hours. It's a big topic, but we do have to tell you about our guest for the next show. Our next show, our guest is Bill Sprague, who is the owner of Risk Averse Insurance, which is a southeastern Pennsylvania premier insurance agency that works very closely to make sure that they get needs-based coverage for small and medium-sized businesses. Business is the future of America, and we need to protect the businesses that we have, and Bill is an expert that will be addressing that. So be sure to tune in. Until then, thank you for being with us today and exploring this topic in depth on longevity. And remember, your money matters.